Excellent, thank you. Wouldn't that have been something to have selected a football coach and a university president on the same weekend? I don't think that's ever happened at a major university. Everyone wants a say on a coach. I have my ideas. I think Mark Trestman would have made an outstanding head coach. I met him once. He was 12. I do happen to know, seriously, he really is an outstanding person, because a former neighbor of ours worked with a guy whose brother-in-law's nephew was best friends with a guy whose cousin used to work on Mark Trestman's car. Tall guy, real tall guy. I mean, the guy who worked on the car. He said, Mark Trestman is outstanding. By God, that's good enough for me. So, the search goes on. The point is, can our University of Paranoia take one more rejection? A major land-grant university put down by 2 coaches and 2 presidential candidates in 1 week? Well, now we have some rejecting of our own to do, namely the hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans whom we are kicking out the door in a couple of weeks because they are dysfunctional. They're old, they're homeless, they're jobless, and they're hungry, so what good are they? That is a bit harsh, but not much more so than the welfare reform bill that our wonderfully compassionate Congress passed this year. We'll see how Minnesota is preparing to handle it, and we'll talk with Senator Paul Wellstone about it. And then we will make a whopping transition to the world of the crayon. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, crayons, Crayolas, used the way they have never been used before. In a news-packed week, then, the University of Minnesota has its 14th president. I say this much is certain. One would not have been poorly served to vote for the University of Texas Provost, Dr. Mark Udall, for university president, if based only on his remarkable survival from last week's 3-day public crush. Is the man qualified? What you have to do, you see, is pick out the sound bites that you think are the most germane.
My wife of 30 years always informs me before these talks that I'm one of those people who's not only dull myself, but I bring out dullness in other people. I've been a strong supporter of tenure, and I think it's very important in the protection of academic freedom to make sure that there are very narrow grounds for dismissing a professor, that the burden of proof is on the university. And I like the idea of continuous change, and I really like the idea of responsiveness to customers. Are the students happy with what you're doing? Are you serving the faculty the way you're supposed to? At the top 30 research universities, they tend not to have unionized faculties. I know there are people who sort of disagree about the pros and cons. So I'm skeptical it would have a positive effect. I consider it a faculty prerogative, and whatever the faculty decides, I can live with that in terms of my relationship with the faculty. Very proud of the teaching academy that I established. We gave everyone who was elected to the Academy of Distinguished Teachers got a $5,000 raise, got better parking, which
I think he'll do. A little salary adjustment to be made there, but that'll work out. In all my 87 years in this business, I do not recall a Christmas holiday weekend or week so jammed with important news stories. Most of them took place on Thursday. Number 1, Governor Carlson returned from the Sell Minnesota mission to Hollywood, telling a wildly cheering and applauding gathering of arts people at the Children's Theater that he'll ask the legislature to put 12 million simoleons to further the cause of the arts in Minnesota, because, he said, a community without the arts is a community without a soul. And look, there on that very same day, the Minneapolis City Council adds to the news mix by choosing 2 of 4 possible sites to build a sports complex that would include a baseball stadium. The 2 to be known hereinafter as the Riverfront site, just off the connection between Highways 35W and 994, close to the Metrodome, and the site hereafter to be known as the Bureau of Engraving site, also near the Metrodome, but this one would knock out the Kohl's Media headquarters. That is impossible. Also on Thursday, downtown St. Paul made headlines. I mean, one big hopeful headline detailing the possibility of Harmon Limited of Bloomington, with 150 employees, moving its headquarters to 3 floors of the World Trade Center, a structure Harmon helped build. And that Health Partners, also of Bloomington, could be moving 400 of its employees to the First Trust Center on 5th Street downtown. That's good. That sort of thing continues. If it proliferates, we may yet see the return of a movie theater to downtown St. Paul. Then all these events broke on Thursday. The state Supreme Court upheld Minnesota's Sexually Dangerous Persons Act, approving the continued civil confinement of the murderer rapist Dennis Linehan. State Attorney General is suing the United Children's Fund, charging that the charity has no program services to prevent or detect cancer in children. For $2 million, the Twins signed a reasonably credible National League starting pitcher named Bob Tewksbury. Credible, that is, by today's declining starting pitcher skills. And there's so many other things on Thursday. A friend of mine got married in San Diego. Now, that's of limited interest. More on Sunday does wish to take a moment to salute a local doctor who includes in his treatment the best medicine of all, humor, to fight the insidious flu bug which knocked out about half of society last week. It ravaged the schools. 20% was the absenteeism figure at many schools. One reported 300 students out. Many schools reported double absenteeism. More than 100 people were treated in one day at the Now Care Center in Minnetonka, where Dr. Tony Lysinga, acknowledging that the bug came earlier this year and hit harder, said that while rest is the best treatment,
I usually recommend at least a month or so down somewhere in the Caribbean, or send the kiddies to grandma until they're well.
May I suggest that Dr. Lysinga's patients are likely to be up and about sooner than most. One story captivated all of us last week. I mean, even the networks sent out crews for this one. We were all numbed. We couldn't believe that such an upscale, conspicuously well-heeled family as Dr. Gerald Dick, a prosperous dentist, and his wife and son who live in a $400,000 house in Roseville, and there's a lawyer daughter in Chicago, could turn out to be shoplifters. Well, according to the police complaint, they didn't do the actual lifting, but allegedly paid a career shoplifter named Greg Thomas to rip off hundreds of thousands of dollars in opulence from Dayton's. Suit sweaters, fine and fine crystal, lavish furs, leather briefcases. Why? Well, the answers may be forthcoming in their next court appearance on January 9th. The end of welfare as we know it. So said President Clinton when he signed the welfare reform bill into law, as it changes the way of living for millions of Americans. It is becoming the most kicked about political football in decades. We'll get into the fray in a moment. And also, we'll talk about it with our in-studio guest, Senator Paul Wellstone. This is what gets your attention. In planning this story about the coming of welfare reform in Minnesota, we discovered that nearly as frightened as the hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans for whom there will no longer be help are the officials and the planners and the politicians and the professionals who are facing a tide they don't know how to stop. The homeless live a hard life.
It's kind of hit me now. You know, we're out of here.
Come January 1st, their lives will get even harder.
The county is expecting a disaster.
The county calls this onslaught of new homeless a tide.
My name's Tom Logan. I work at the Alliance of the Streets.
Every day, Tom Loughlin tries to ebb the tide, the wave after wave of disadvantaged and disenfranchised who file through his office at the Alliance of the Street.
It's a horrible outlook. We've seen this long procession, and it certainly is clear that our society is willing to have lots of homeless single men, that's fine. And it looks like we're going to accept homeless families now, too, and homeless children.
Many of Mr. Loughlin's clients are addicted to drug or alcohol. Under the new welfare bill, addiction will no longer be considered a disability, which means many of these folks will be back out on the street.
I have about 100 people.
And how many people will this affect?
It affected probably right around 85 of them, and about half of those will end up losing their benefits.
Do you have enough retainers?
Michelle has already lost her benefits, but she's one of the lucky ones. She has a job at the Alliance.
It's going to be a lot of confused people during the first of the year. And what makes it even worse is the winter. You know, where they're going to go, shelters.
No one knows where the overflow will go. The county has yet to publicly announce its plans. However, More on Sunday has received a copy of an inter-office memo from Hennepin County addressing these problems. The future looks bleak. In the memo, the county expects a greater spread of communicable diseases as people double up or more become homeless. It's anticipating an increase in criminal activity, and it predicts more children in foster care because their parents won't have adequate money to house or feed them.
It's grim. I don't know. The more places, as far as housing, they're just the market is so small.
Are people scared?
Yeah, they are.
Shelters and warm waiting areas will be overwhelmed. When that happens, the county may house the homeless in lobbies at different government buildings.
If that overflows, they will end up in the public health building, and it's my understanding that they have also looked at heated parking garages for overflow. They're expecting a large number of people, or they're expecting a real disaster.
The Republicans pushed the welfare bill through Congress, and the president signed it, an act which outraged one Minnesota senator.
But now when it comes to poor children in America who clearly are invisible here in Washington, D.C., at least in the Congress, faceless and voiceless, how generous we are with their suffering. And you dare to call that reform?
Already the speech is being compared by many Americans with that of Senator Hubert Humphrey's famous civil rights speech of 1948. Senator Wellstone, thank you very much for being with us. Have we overstated the case from what you've seen here?
No, I mean, I wish you had, but no, I don't think so. I think, David, on present course, and somehow we have to change the course, we're going to see
How do you do
more
it? What's to be
impoverished
done?
children and more hungry children. Well, I mean, a couple of different things for me as a senator from Minnesota, given our tradition. There's so much goodness in our state. I will be on the floor of the Senate trying to correct some of what's wrong in this bill from the very beginning. But I don't think I will have the votes to really make the changes until people begin to see, like what they're seeing in your show today, see what this means in personal terms, see what some of this welfare change is going to do to children, what it's going to do to kids with disabilities, what it's going to do to elderly people. It's just wrong.
But we don't see that, Senator. We isolate ourselves. We have isolate ourselves. Where are we going to see that?
Well, I'm a little bit less tough about this than I think you are in terms of the haves, if you will. I think there's a tremendous amount of goodness in the country. And I think that if people in Minnesota and people in the nation, as this debate goes forward, and there has to be a debate, we can't be silent, as they begin to see pictures like on your show, and national media has to focus on this as well, of children that are hungry, of elderly people that are being hurt. People are going to say, wait a minute, we voted for work, and I think that's good, but we didn't vote to hurt children. We didn't vote for more poverty or hunger among children or elderly people. That's wrong.
Do you think that the American public does not understand what the welfare reform bill entails?
Oh yeah, I'm sure of that, and I'm not putting down the public. Look, I went through an election where there was plenty of attack on this, and I had really good people come up to me whom I hope voted for me, although I don't know, and they would say to me, Paul, how could you vote against this bill? Aren't you for work? Don't you value work like we do? Well, of course I value the work, and I think work is real important, but cuts in nutrition programs for children, eliminating benefits for legal immigrants, elderly people who are disabled, hurting children with disabilities, that isn't even reform. I don't even call it reform. It's harsh, it's punitive, and it's not right.
I'm sorry, I'm not as conversant with the opposition as I probably should be, but what was the rationale by many of those leaders who did sign the bill, including the president?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that there were a good number of people who voted for the bill who didn't necessarily believe in all of it, but politically, they were afraid not to because they felt like the populace at large, the public at large, is so angry about welfare. But you see, that's because the public really wants to see the work part, but the public didn't want this happening to children. People were afraid. Politically, people were afraid to vote against what was called reform. How can you describe what we've just seen today on your show, reform? This isn't reform. Reform is work, job training. Reform isn't hurting children, cutting nutrition for children, cutting off benefits for elderly people, cutting off benefits for disabled children. That's not reform. That's not what our country's about. This is wrong. This is wrong.
President Clinton signed the bill out of remembering Hubert Humphrey's famous phrase that politics is the art of compromise. Yeah. Were there great compromises here on the president's part? Favors traded?
Well, I think there was too great a compromise on his part on this. I mean, Hubert Humphrey also talked about the way we treat people right in the dawn of their lives, the children in the twilight of their lives, the elderly and people who are in the shadow of their lives, people who are poor and people with disabilities. That was Hubert Humphrey. That's the tradition that sure. I think should inform us.
What is the possibility of adjustment, rewriting portions of the welfare reform bill?
I think there is a possibility. My friend Daniel Patrick Moynihan doesn't think so. I mean, he's just devastated because
it's a done deal.
Because he thinks it's a terrible mistake and we've undone 50 years of history. But I think there's goodness in people in Minnesota and the country, and when people really see what this is doing to families and doing to children, I think people won't like it, and I'm very determined to be a part of an effort to fix it. Mm-hmm. It's too harsh, it's too extreme, and it's wrong.
Senator Wellstone, on behalf of hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans, of whom I don't happen to be, I'm fortunate enough to be in that category. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We wish you very well.
Thank you.
Go back to Washington.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If, when we were kids and had seen Don Marco working with crayons, we'd have never touched one of them again. On the other hand, we will see in a moment what we might have learned.
Each time you do something, it's a challenge. The greatest challenge, and what I like to do the best of all, are portraits. I like to do people.
This is December 15th. What happened? Didn't we just celebrate Memorial Day last week? No, last week our resident poet was thrashing around in an extreme state of angst over the annual seasonal rerun. That time of year has come again, and much as it appalls, we usually sane and cautious men will head out to the malls. It's time to join the shopping race, bring wallet, spouse, and kiddies, and hope we find a parking space that's still within the cities. The store's a madhouse, wild as hell. It's shopping in flagrante. The people writhe and moan and yell like something out of Dante. Do you have this in red or teal? Is that an extra large? Do you think that this has sex appeal? Will that be cash or charge? The whole thing's gotten so absurd, a twisted plot of Satan's. It makes me wish I'd never heard of Macy's, Sears, or Dayton's. So, fa-la-la and all that crap, this shopping stuff's a bummer. How about we all just take a nap and not wake up till summer? Most of us gave up crayons at the age of 7 or 8, maybe 10. I sniffed them till I was about 12. They're not addictive. But here's a man, an older man, who's still sharpening them in his studio in Duluth.
It was something that I suddenly discovered again for the second time, because I, like the rest of the kids, when I asked them how many had used them, of course everybody had.
You may never look at crayons the same way. Forget what you knew and drew as a kid. Don Marco is the king of Crayolas.
Whatever you're imagining, that's not it. That you will be amazed and delighted when you see what it is. I sharpen the third away.
Today, Don is delighting a group of awed fifth graders at St. Bernard's in St. Paul.
How do you make him look so realistic to like the feels the real person?
There's 3 secrets. I remember preschool. I grew up out in the country and no other kids around. So before I started school, I was just my own imagination to keep me going and everything. And my memories are of being on the kitchen floor with crayons and with paper and doing things. And it's always been interesting.
Don began taking his art seriously about 25 years ago, after he retired as an air traffic controller.
The results from the first attempt was absolutely horrible. And it's what motivated me to keep at it. And it took 2.5, 3 years to finally get to the point where I thought it was worthwhile. And I never knew how good it could get, because like Star Trek, where no man has gone before, that's the way it was pointed out to me. I never realized it, but they pointed out to me that there was a similarity there.
It can take Don months to complete one picture. Portraits are his specialty. He particularly enjoys drawing Native Americans.
This was my first printing.
Don doesn't use the entire box of 64 crayons, and there are some colors he says he'll never use, like a day glow orange or pink.
Nobody else can do it. Other than my son, we've got the field to ourselves.
John Markle. The choir from Robbinsdale Armstrong, the chamber choir, has made a triumphant return from the nation's capital. They weren't just singing, they were taking pictures as well, and we'll look at some of their home movies in a moment. They came home last week. The 22 members of the Armstrong High School Chamber Choir raised the $17,000 to get to Washington to sing at the White House. And they returned every bit as exhilarated as when they left. They sang for the president. How'd it go?
The singing went good. In the White House, we sang about the best we've ever sang.
It was really a wonderful experience to sing in the White House, and I can't believe they chose us.
It's a one-in-a-lifetime experience. I mean, it's really great.
There was no disappointments whatsoever. It was absolutely beautiful singing in the East Room.
The trip was wonderful. It was so much fun, and it's one of the greatest experiences I've ever had.
Incredible. I mean, just the memories that I'm just always going to treasure. It's just, I'm never going to forget it.